Welcome to 528 Portal, the space where your heart opens, your energy clears, and your higher self becomes your guide. Today, we are diving into one of the most powerful, mystical, and life-changing principles in the entire quantum reality: the collapse of old timelines. This is the deeper work behind manifestation, identity shifting, and conscious evolution. It's the process of letting outdated versions of you dissolve so the highest version of you can finally take the lead. And once you understand how timeline collapse really works, nothing in your life will ever feel random again. You will see why certain relationships faded, why certain patterns returned, why certain opportunities fell apart, and why certain chapters of your life closed abruptly. You will understand that every collapse was clearing the path for an aligned timeline your soul was already calling you toward. Take a slow breath in. Feel your awareness gently settle. Let your body soften into presence. Because this is not a video you simply listen to, this is one you experience. Let each word carry you deeper and deeper into the reality where your future self already exists. Let each idea loosen the grip of old timelines. Allow yourself to sense the energetic shift that begins the moment you choose a new path. By the time you finish this video, parts of you that have been holding on for years will begin to release. Not through force, but through clarity. Not through pushing, but through understanding. This is the sacred power of the timeline collapse. To understand timeline collapse, you need to understand what a timeline actually is. A timeline is not a date. It is not a sequence of events. It is not a linear path moving from point A to point B. In quantum reality, a timeline is a vibrational pathway shaped by your identity, your emotions, your beliefs, and your expectations. It's the energetic structure that forms around the version of you that you choose to be. When you repeat certain emotions, certain stories, certain habits, and certain patterns, those repeated frequencies solidify into a timeline. A predictable path that keeps recreating the same types of experiences, relationships, opportunities, and outcomes. Most people live in a timeline created years ago. They live inside old emotional patterns, old beliefs, old fears, old coping mechanisms, old trauma responses, old identity structures, old versions of themselves they no longer resonate with. You can feel when you're living in an outdated timeline because life feels stagnant, heavy, small, repetitive, or predictable. You feel like you're moving in circles rather than forward. You feel trapped in old cycles even when your heart is begging for change. You feel like you're living a life that no longer fits the frequency of who you've become. But here's the quantum truth. You are not living inside one fixed timeline. You exist within a field of infinite timelines. Infinite versions of reality, infinite potentials, infinite paths, infinite versions of you. Every version of you already exists as a possibility in the quantum field. The version who stayed stuck exists. The version who fully healed exists. The version who created abundance exists. The version who fell in love exists. The version who forgave. The version who started over. The version who trusted themselves. The version who rose from the ashes. They all exist as real energetic structures in the field, and the timeline that becomes your lived experience is the one you emotionally align with. A timeline activates the moment you choose it. When you think a new thought, when you adopt a new belief, when you release an old identity, when you take an aligned step, when you rise into a new level of self-worth, you shift into a new timeline. But here is where the process becomes complicated for most people. A new timeline cannot fully stabilize in your life until the old one collapses. And collapse is often uncomfortable because collapse requires letting go of safety, familiarity, predictability, and the emotional habits that once protected you. Timeline collapse can look like relationships falling away, identities dissolving, sudden endings, intense emotions, old patterns resurfacing, or feeling lost between who you were and who you are becoming. Timeline collapse feels like, I can't go back, but I don't fully know how to go forward. It feels like standing between lifetimes. It feels like the ground beneath you is shifting. But this is not a breakdown. This is a breakthrough. You are not falling apart. You are shedding the timeline that was built by the version of you you're no longer choosing to be. Imagine this. Your old timeline is a room filled with memories, emotions, habits, and identities. When you decide to step into a new timeline, the door to the next room opens. But the door behind you doesn't close right away. You stand in the doorway between timelines. The old room feels familiar. The new room feels expansive but uncertain. This in-between state is where most people turn back, not because the old timeline is better, but because it's familiar. Humans often cling to familiarity, even when it hurts. The quantum work is learning to breathe through the discomfort of the in-between, trusting that the new timeline is forming even when you can't see the evidence yet. Take another slow breath. Place a gentle awareness on your heart. Feel the truth of this. Every time you choose healing, you collapse a timeline where you stayed wounded. Every time you choose self-respect, you collapse a timeline where you stayed small. Every time you choose courage, you collapse a timeline built from fear. Every time you choose truth, you collapse a timeline built from survival. Timeline collapse is not destruction. It is liberation. It is the release of identity structures, emotional patterns, and energetic attachments that no longer hold the frequency of your future self. But now we go deeper, into the mechanics of collapse. When a timeline collapses, the quantum field begins reorganizing the circumstances of your life to match your new vibration. People who can't meet your new frequency begin to drift away. Opportunities that don't match your new identity fall apart. Situations that were holding you in the old version of yourself begin to crumble. Your emotional triggers begin to surface for release. You start to see parts of yourself that were unconscious. You feel old patterns rise to the surface, as if asking you, "Are you sure you want to evolve?" This is the echo of the collapsing timeline. When an old timeline dies, it echoes. It tries to pull you back through old emotional reactions, old temptations, old fears, old comfort zones. The echo of a collapsing timeline is not a sign that you're failing. It's a sign that you're close to a breakthrough. It's a sign that the old timeline is losing power. When you feel triggered, discouraged, emotional, or confused, don't interpret it as regression. Interpret it as integration. You are integrating the lessons of the old timeline so you can step fully into the next one. The echo is the test. Will you choose the old identity or the new one? Now let's talk about why collapse is essential. You cannot bring an old identity into a new timeline because identities carry frequencies. Your timeline is not built by what you want. It is built by who you are being. If you want the timeline where you are confident, you cannot bring the identity of the person who doubts themselves. If you want the timeline where you are abundant, you cannot bring the identity of the person who lives in scarcity. If you want the timeline where you are loved, you cannot bring the identity of the person who fears intimacy. The frequency mismatch collapses the old identity so the new one can become dominant. This is why quantum shifting is not mental wishful thinking. It is embodied identity work. You don't manifest your next timeline by hoping. You manifest your next timeline by becoming the person who belongs to it. Identity is the key. If manifestation is the destination, identity is the doorway. Take a breath. Let this land deeply. You are always one identity shift away from a new timeline. When you let the old version of you die, the old timeline dies with it. But how do you collapse a timeline consciously, intentionally, and gracefully? You collapse a timeline by withdrawing your emotional energy from it. Timelines feed on repetition. They continue because you keep choosing them emotionally, mentally, and energetically. When you stop choosing them, they dissolve. If you consistently stop giving attention, emotion, and identity to the old timeline, the collapse is inevitable. Old timelines collapse when you stop telling the old story, when you stop justifying your limitations, when you stop defending your pain, when you stop repeating your past to yourself as if it's who you are, when you stop living as the version of you who was shaped by fear, lack, survival, or trauma, when you stop choosing the familiar pattern over the aligned path. And now comes the most magnetic truth. Once the old timeline collapses, a field of pure potential opens. New timelines appear not randomly, but as energetic matches to the version of you that emerges after the collapse. Once you let go of the version of you who lived in fear, the timeline of courage opens. Once you let go of the version who settled, the timeline of fulfillment opens. Once you let go of the version who accepted less, the timeline of expansion opens. Once you let go of the version who felt unworthy, the timeline of ease opens. Once you let go of the version who doubted their intuition, the timeline of aligned decisions opens. Now, let's take this deeper with imagery. Imagine standing at the edge of a forest at night. Behind you is a path you've walked many times. You know every tree, every shadow, every turn. The path is familiar, but it leads nowhere new. In front of you is a new path that glows faintly with golden light. It feels unknown, mysterious, and alive. The moment you step forward, the old path behind you begins to dissolve into mist. You can still hear echoes of it calling your name, but it no longer has substance. It is memory, not reality. The quantum field works exactly like this. Once you step onto a new path, the old one has no life force unless you turn back to revive it. Let's move into identity merging. To access a new timeline, you must merge with the version of you who already lives there. That version already exists in the quantum field as a fully formed energetic blueprint. Your job is not to create that future self from scratch. Your job is to meet them, feel them, align with them. Let them lead. Ask yourself, how does my future self think? How do they respond to challenges? How do they treat themselves emotionally? How do they hold boundaries? How do they speak? How do they walk into a room? How do they make decisions? How do they handle relationships? How do they move money? How do they move energy? And most importantly, what emotional frequency do they live in as their baseline? Embodying your future self is the most direct form of timeline shifting. If you want a new timeline, step into the emotional frequency of the version of you who already has it. This is not pretending. This is aligning. This is coherence. Now, let us move into the healing aspect of collapse. When a timeline collapses, unhealed parts of you rise to the surface not to sabotage you, but to be integrated. Old fears may come up because they can't follow you into your new reality. Old wounds may resurface because they are ready to be released. Old memories may appear because your system is cleansing itself of emotional residue. The collapse is not the wound reopening. It is the wound emptying itself. This is the detox phase of transformation. You are not being tested, you are being cleansed. The quantum field always stabilizes after a collapse. Energy rearranges. Life reorganizes. Alignment becomes clearer. Your body feels lighter. Your intuition grows stronger. Signs appear. Synchronicities increase. You begin to feel guided again. This is the stabilization of your new timeline. Now place your hand on your heart. Feel the warmth. Feel the pulse. Feel the intelligence of your body. And repeat quietly within yourself. I release the timeline I have outgrown. I choose the timeline that matches my highest self. I step forward with clarity, openness, and trust. Stay here for a moment. Breathe slowly. Feel the opening in your chest. Feel the presence around you. Feel the shift happening at the edges of your reality. Thank you for tuning into 528 Portal. May your heart stay open, your intuition stay clear, and your path stay aligned. If this message resonated, like and subscribe for more deeply transformative content.